Every place where we come through, there was lots of trucks. Weyburn, there must have been 250 trucks waiting. In every town that we come in, there was more joining every time. I think everybody's sick of the government that's ruining us. Other than that, everybody's just here to try get rid of this carbon tax. Why doesn't the federal government do like our provincial government? I got 20% back on my solar system. Why doesn't the federal government also give us an incentive to put this in? Instead of giving money to other countries to stop carbon, why doesn't he give everybody in Canada a chance to do like I'm doing?
We have a lot of members that are going to be negatively impacted by a carbon tax in the province of Saskatchewan. A lot of our guys rely on fossil fuels, unfortunately, to build Saskatchewan's highways and transportation networks. So there's a lot at stake here in terms of jobs and competitive advantage or disadvantage in this case for our members. We're looking at well over $1 million in additional expenses for the industry that's unfortunately going to be, offloaded onto the taxpayers because the major procurer of our service is government, whether it's provincial, federal, or municipal. So ultimately, the taxpayers are going to be, facing a heavier burden because of this.
But we're going to make polluters pay and put money in your pockets.
There is an imperative to put a price on pollution, and if there are costs associated with for average families, we will more than compensate those families for those costs.
Well, how are they going to do that? They talk about this rebate as if you're going to get the money back, and then you're going to get a premium, so you're going to get even more money back. How do they calculate that, though? That was a part that was lost from the conversation.
We fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing ground.
Thank you for joining us. You are listening to A Radio, and this is The Morning Moment. We're on weekdays, 11:45 Eastern. Follow us on Spreaker.com and click on the like button. This piece caught my eye. It just popped up out of the blue, and I did some investigation on it. It's a piece from Ireland. Now, I noted the other day, listening to Hutch on Cold War Radio, that listeners had no idea of the mass immigration being forced upon the island of Ireland due to their masters in Brussels and that of the EU. Well, here's another group of these nutballs headed by Elizabeth May in Canada. Now, in Canada, we expect they are keeping their heads down about this. There is no doubt that they don't want this story told, certainly in Canada. But maybe in the States, you might want to review this and consider whether you want these people running any part of any government in your country, be it even at the local town council. It's from gript.ie. This is a piece on someone called Eamon Ryan, and this is what he said. When I'm in charge, it will be 1 car per 10 families. Yes, you heard that right. One of the problems that the Green movement has is that every so often it has to tell the truth about what it actually wants. This doesn't happen very often. Of course, most of the time they get away unchallenged with benign sermons about the new green economy and a just transition and how vegetarianism is actually good for you and all that stuff. But of course, if we are to go to a zero carbon economy by 2050 or 2030, or in fact any time prior to the construction and deployment of working nuclear fission reactors, that's a bit tongue-in-cheek, I think, the truth is that most of the changes that would have to happen are very unpleasant indeed. Yesterday morning, Eamon Ryan was somewhat forced into revealing one of them. How on earth would that work? How does 1 car making 10 journeys emit less carbon than 10 cars making 1 journey each? Can you imagine having to share a single car with almost 10 families in a rural village, or indeed anywhere. You want to visit a sick mother in hospital 30 miles away, but the family next door has a niece's wedding on the other side of the country that weekend. You work as a nurse at 4 p.m. this week, but everyone else who works normal hours is pooling the car to take them to a 9-to-5 job. There will be, of course, those who say, of course, that most journeys could be catered for with public transport. And of course, improved public transport would suit a lot of people, particularly in large urban areas. But of course, the thing about public transport is that it operates to the public's schedule, not yours. The genius of the private car, and the reason it's so popular, is the freedom it provides. Public transport cannot replicate that freedom, no matter how hard it tries, or how good the service is. You will never be able to get up in the morning and decide that you're going to go to Killarney or Westport or Courtown for the day, because the chances are that using public transport to get to those places will involve a military-style planning of timetables and an overnight stay. Taking away the car or forcing 10 families to share a car would dramatically reduce the freedom of the average person and would likely make them poorer financially and emotionally. Having to consult your neighbours every time you decide to visit your family would be a horror show for most people, and that is before you consider the rows and the bad blood that would inevitably arise. So why on earth is he proposing this? On one level, it's just honesty. The truth about climate movement is that it knows that its own beliefs require functional abolition of private transport, starting with the car and ending with the aeroplane. Your free moving around the planet is the number one causes of carbon emissions. That's what they say. Electric cars are all very well, but even they need to be charged, and most electricity production still emits carbon. Second, there's a subset of voters to whom this kind of nonsense appeals. The idea of us living and working communally, sharing resources and building a caring community, all that high-minded, unworkable rubbish. You almost certainly know somebody who thinks like this. The problem with it is that it ignores human nature and the jealousness and bitterness that arises when people are given the slightest bit of power over other people. Can you imagine somebody inventing a family crisis that they absolutely have to attend on the same day that those snobs next door were due to go to the airport for their fancy holiday? Eamon Ryan and those voters he is targeting absolutely cannot. The good news is that this idea is so transparently bonkers that there isn't a hope in hell of it being implemented in our lifetimes, assuming, of course, you're smart enough to keep your vote well away from Green candidates. I direct that comment to my Canadian listeners who are thinking of voting for Elizabeth May and her candidates. Article continues. While we're on the subject of Greens and their tremendous ideas, you probably didn't see BBC's Andrew Neil interviewing an Extinction Rebellion spokeswoman yesterday evening. And ask yourself, when was the last time an Irish journalist asked questions like this to a Green extremist? Well, there you have it. That's the piece. I'm going to play you that clip now.
Xeon Lights, she's a spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion. Welcome. I've seen some of your activists claim on TV that billions of people are going to die in quite short order. One of your founders, Roger Hallam, said in April, our children are going to die in the next 10 to 20 years. What's the scientific basis for these claims?
So these claims have been disputed, admittedly. There are some scientists who are agreeing and there are some who are saying that they're simply not true. But, the overall issue is that these deaths are going to happen. We don't know exact numbers, and actually it's a little bit, concerning to focus on how many deaths. There will be deaths and mass suffering, and that, you know, any amount is enough as far as we're concerned.
But most scientists don't agree with this. Climate change scientists, those who know there is a problem and it has to be tackled and things have to be done, more has to be done that's being done. I've looked through the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the latest AR5, and the October of last year special report. I see no reference to billions of people going to die or children going to die in under 20 years.
Well, I don't think he was claiming that was from that report.
No, I know that, but what I'm saying is
But
I don't know where the scientific validity comes for that. I mean,
So there's a lot-
how would they die?
mass migration around the world already taking place due to prolonged drought in countries, particularly in South Asia. There are wildfires in Indonesia, the Amazon rainforest, also Siberia, you know, the Arctic.
These are all really important problems, and they can cause fatalities.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't cause billions of deaths. They don't mean that our young people will all be dead in 20 years.
No, perhaps not in 20 years, but I can't speak to what Roger was,
He's one of your
meaning
founders.
with that. He's one of the members of Extinction Rebellion, yes.
I mean, you talk weather-related disasters. There seem to be a lot of them around at the moment, and people die from them. But on the latest figures I've seen, 100 years ago, weather-related disasters killed 500,000 people a year. Today, it's 20,000 a year. Still 20,000 too many, but it's a reduction of 95,000. It doesn't lead to the 95%. A reduction of 95%, it does not lead to a death of billions. I mean, aren't you scaring people with this rhetoric, aren't you?
I think there's a danger of scaring people simply because we're not taking it seriously enough, and people are feeling really, you know, desperate that we're heard on this. And unfortunately, you know, alarmist language works, which is why we're discussing it right now.
But does it work? It could. I mean, I've seen young girls on television, part of your demonstration, particularly the school ones, when they take the day off to demonstrate, crying because they think they're going to die in 5 or 6 years' time.
No, it's not necessarily.
Crying because they don't think they'll ever see adulthood. And yet there is no scientific basis for the claims that your organisation is making.
The young people that I've spoken to aren't crying because they think they're going to die in a few years. It's because they don't see their children as having a future. They don't want to have children. And they're worrying about, you know, coastal regions going underwater, other countries and island nations going underwater, you know, the Maldives going underwater, the mass displacement that's happening, the weather extremes, which may be on a downward trajectory, but climate scientists are telling us that they will be on the increase.
Well, take rising sea levels, because the sea levels are rising. There's no, the UN IPCC makes that quite clear. But even the UN IPCC says that its median projection for sea rising is 0.5 metre by 2100, by 2100, at the end of this century. Now, that will create problems from places from Miami to Bangladesh. But 0.5 metre will not result in billions of people dying. If we do the right thing, it could be managed.
If we do the right thing, but we're not doing much at all at the moment, so this is one of the problems.
But you accept that 0.5 metre would not, if the UN median projection is right, would not result in the sort of apocalyptic predictions that your organisation makes.
They're very conservative numbers, that's what we'd say. And actually, a lot of the data in the IPCC report, not criticising scientists because they did an incredible job, using pre-industrial levels of data. They're looking at, you know, carbon emissions. They're not factoring feedback loops, things like this. There are climate scientists saying now that we think it's a lot worse. You know, James Hansen, ex-NASA scientist, is saying we're in a planetary emergency. So we're using that language. We're not trying to use alarmist language. We're listening to what scientists are saying and using language that we feel is appropriate to the situation.
You are losing alarmist language. One of your other founders said that she thought everybody could be dead within several decades. 97% was the figure she put on it. But you want, at the moment, the IPCC policy, the agreed policies to try and cut carbon emissions in half by 2030 and go to zero net emissions by 2050. But you want 2025 for zero emissions, only 6 years away. What would that require?
I mean, I'm not here to give you solutions and to tell you what we should be doing. That's not.
I know you're gumming up the whole of Westminster.
Well, what we're saying is listen to the experts.
Cause.
We're saying listen to the experts. Let's listen to what their ideas are, what they're saying. And at the moment, we're not putting those plans in place. We're not creating policies that reflect what those scientists are saying. This is why we're protesting.
But the experts have a consensus around getting net zero by 2050. You're saying 2025. You're not listening to the experts.
Well, there's some research into the IPCC report that was more recent by Professor Michael Mann, who looked at where they came up with the 2050 figure. And actually, they're relying on a carbon capture, biogas energy storage, BECCS, and there's a problem with that it's an untested technology. And by relying on that, there's a 50-50 chance that we will fail with the 2050 year in place.
You can always pick one piece of research. The fact is the IPCC report has 6,000 scientific references, 91 authors, and is a global consensus with review editors from 40 countries. But let's come back to the 2025 target. One critic has said it would mean the confiscation of petrol cars, state rationing of meat, and limiting families to one flight every 5 years. And that was actually on a 2030 target. Do you agree with that?
I agree that we need to do whatever it takes to bring emissions down, to allow young people to have a future, be able to have some hope for the future. And I'm not saying that because we're alarming children. I'm listening to what they're saying. They're learning about the consequences of climate change at school, and they're worrying about...
Of course. I'm not arguing about the consequences of climate change at all. But you would have to stop, to reach your target, you'd have to stop all flying. Aviation would come to an end.
Possibly. I mean,
by 2025.
Again, this is something that we need to look at. We need to look at the aviation industry. We need to do an analysis on what needs to happen, and then we need to take action.
Well, we know what would
on all industries, agriculture, energy, everything.
We know what would happen
to be an expert in these areas.
If we stopped all flying. It would reduce global temperatures using the mainstream climate models by 0.03 degrees. 0.03 degrees. And you would stop all flying for that.
But what you've just said with the IPCC report, we're both in agreement that we listen to that. That's 99% consensus of scientists. That's great. We agree with that. So that report is saying if we don't bring emissions down, to halt warming
I understand.
to 1.5 degrees. So aren't we in agreement that we
it's the 2025 target, which is the keystone of your policy.
It's a precautionary principle that
just ask you this. Most homes in this country are heated by gas. Most people cook with gas. The fact is, all of that would have to go in 6 years for a 2025 target, wouldn't it? All of it.
We put a man on the moon before we had the internet and mobile phones.
So you heard that. Now I have to be honest, I don't know if there is a Green Party in the United States. I expect there is, because there's most parties. And if there is a Green Party, I have no doubt that it's funded either directly or indirectly by George Soros. But I urge you all to take these nutballs seriously. We've got them in Canada, and I know they're all over Europe too. Because if you don't, and you don't crush them like bugs, you will live to regret that day sooner than you think. These activist groups and parties are like whack-a-mole. As soon as you get rid of one of them, another one surfaces. But if you don't continue to be vigilant, they spread and spread, and look at the damage they will make. Maybe it will be so bad it can't be fixed. At the end of the day, certainly in Canada, the Green Party on the surface seems to be a nice, cuddly, well-meaning group of people who want to do good. However, look a little closer, dig a bit deeper, and their policies and ideas and ideals are totally incompatible with our modern way of life. If you want to honestly give up totally your current existence, and I mean totally, every aspect, then that's fine. I don't. I, for one, will not live in a commune. I will not give up my car, what I eat, when I eat it, my yard, my right to buy stuff I want, live where I live, do what I do, what I want, when I want. If you are prepared to give up all of that, then good luck to you. But don't do it here. We don't want it. I suggest you move to Cuba. No, please, please move to Cuba, where they embrace that crap. I want a better life, not a backward one. Oh, and please, on the way out, please leave your light on, because unlike you, we want to see where we're going. Have a nice life. Oh, by the way, the links will always be on my site. Just one final thought. Whilst watching that ridiculous debate the other night, not the French one, nobody watched that, the English debate, Elizabeth May was on there, and I got to thinking, as you do. I did a piece not very long ago about the real impact oil has on our lives and all the things that we depend on that come from oil. And it was a multitude of things. And I looked at her on stage. She had glasses on. She was wearing modern-looking clothes. I have no doubt she was driven to the studio in a car. I have no doubt that she uses makeup, as most women do. Nothing wrong with that. And I have no doubt that all her modern clothes you could see, and the apparel that you obviously can't see, were made in modern factories. So I put it to Ms. Elizabeth May, why do you dress in modern garb and use modern transport when you despise everything that it represents? Far better that you keep to your morals and turn up in a hassock made of hemp, tied with a piece of rope, than stand there and extort your so-called virtues on the rest of us, when in fact you're nothing but a complete hypocrite. When people analyse what we get from oil and how we couldn't manage our modern lives without it, they will soon realise that these leftist green policies that Elizabeth May and Trudeau and others spout are ridiculous. As I've said in this piece, you cannot manage without modern amenities and have a modern life. Not everything is created by solar power or wind or anything else, or vegetables. They just don't think it through. Oh, and by the way, the biggest creator of carbon in the world is human beings, by an enormous factor. Funny they never mention that, isn't it? You can find more at aradio.wordpress.com, where you can find links to us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Gab, and email. We are also on Spotify. Just go to the podcast section and type Canadian Politics with a twist, and you'll find us. We are continuing to reach out to you, so please pass on the links. Please click on the follow button on Spreaker.com. You can listen to all our morning moments at Spreaker.com under A Radio. That's EHRADIO, A Radio. And please click on the like button. And you can now hear a weekend review of our podcasts on WHBJ DB, News Talk Radio. Join us and many others. And you can find all our podcasts and morning moments at aradio.wordpress.com. Click on the Morning Moments tab.